journey, just like how you would curate your plate on a grand feast. And that is exactly what we are going to delve deep into right now. The past versus the current education, or maybe we could call it the Sadya to buffet. And we have got two eminent speakers for this fireside chat, which shall be moderated by our Honorable Vice Chancellor for the Jain deemed to be University, Bangalore. Professor Raj Singh is an innovative academic leader and an administrator with over 38 years of experience in education and administration. A strong advocate for a flexible education system, Professor Singh champions inter- and transdisciplinary approaches to learning. Throughout his distinguished career, he has led several prominent institutions and universities in India, driving academic excellence and institutional growth. In the early stages of his career, Professor Singh served in the Indian Air Force and later became the founder head of the IZFAI, the Institute of Chartered Financial Analysts of India. His fostering leadership and vision have significantly contributed to shaping the educational landscape in India, fostering innovation and relevance in higher education. Thank you so much, sir, for agreeing to moderate the session. We are so honored to have you. And joining with Dr. Raj Singh, we have an eminent personality. Joining with us, Dr. Shakila Shamsu, the Honorable Educationist and Policy Maker of former OSD NEP. She had a distinguished career spanning nearly 4 decades with 25 years dedicated to teaching and academics at the universities of Mumbai and IGNOU. She also spent 14 years in education planning and policy within the government of India. Dr. Shamsu was invited to join the Ministry of Education as the OSD, which is the New Education Policy, in the Department of Higher Education, where she played a pivotal role in shaping India's educational landscape. She served as a secretary to the committee that drafted the National Education Policy 2020 and made significant contribution to its formulation. Additionally, she was the nodal officer for the Government of India's National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. Dr. Shamsu's career also includes serving as the OSD 12th Plan in the Ministry of Education and Joint Advisor in the Planning Commission, making her a key figure in India's educational reforms. With that, may I humbly request Dr. Shakila Shamsu and Professor Dr. Raj Singh to kindly join with us. We are all, please sit according to the corresponding photos, sir. Thank you so much, and handing over the charge to the both of you.
Thank you, madam, for this introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. What an honor and a privilege to meet a person of the eminence of Dr. Shakila, who is with us. If you have heard the introduction, and I also went through her profile, 4 decades spanning across universities, institutions, and policy making. A very, very rare combination. And we couldn't find a better person than her to resolve some of the mysteries and riddles of today's complexity in education. In fact, in our university, we did an exercise a couple of months ago. We counted from July 2020 till July last year, about 3 years' time. And we found 882 communications received from University Grants Commission. And all of them, so it comes on average 1 per day. And some of the days we'll receive 3, 4, 5. And the urgency is different. Sometimes they say you should have implemented as early as yesterday, or something to be implemented today onwards, something to implement tomorrow onwards. And some, of course, are draft documents for which we need to discuss, debate, and give the feedback. Now, ma'am, I'm reminded of, before I really get into the discussion, I met one of the former secretary of UGC who happened to become vice chancellor in one of the universities. And he met during one of the meetings at the state principal secretary's office. He says, I faced something very interesting. So as secretary UGC, I used to send a lot of letters to the vice chancellors. And when I came and took over as vice chancellor, one day 2-3 big files came in front of me. My colleagues there brought it to me. This is all the letters we received from you when you were the secretary. Can you help us answer and reply to those kind of things? So the whole paradigm shifted, in fact. And he says, I realized for the first time what it means to be on the other side of the table. Now you, if I look at your career, ma'am, you have transited all those kind of aspects and experiences from a university, long time, and then to policy making. And then, of course, the mother of all policies is national education policy. First of all, how did your own paradigm change when you went through these transitions? And then, of course, we'll get into more in-depth introduction.
So thank you, Professor Raj Singh, for that very personalized approach to this chat. Firstly, let me wish all of you all on the occasion of India's Republic Day. And I think we should feel proud of the fact that we belong to a nation which is on a complete path of growth and development. Let me also thank Jain University for this opportunity to be a part of this conversation on a topic that is very, very dear to me as an educator. So coming to your question, Professor Raj Singh, it's very interesting that someone who's been in teaching transited into the Planning Commission. Of course, that was a position by deputation. And it was more in terms of saying that I fitted the bill for that particular position. But I had absolutely no idea in terms of what education planning was all about. Though as teachers, because I don't teach education as such, I started my career as a teacher who was a lecturer, as we were called, in Bombay University, teaching political science, which happens to be my core discipline. And so moving from that to a position of educational planning involved really the role of the Planning Commission then was to study the entire sector which looks at school education, higher education, sports, culture, and youth. So the idea of human resources was a very comprehensive view that we had, and it was not really looking at only education. So when we wrote plan documents, so when you do planning, it's always visionary by nature, but you sent in plans a lot of quantifiable targets. Now it's that stint in the Planning Commission which forced me, or rather the Ministry of Education, called the Ministry of Human Resource Development then, invited me to join them to prepare their working group report which goes into the 12th five-year plan. So the 11th plan, for many of you who would like to know it, where at one time in the 10th five-year plan, where an allocation was only of 8,000 crores for education, the 11th plan saw a 10-fold hike to 84,000 crores. That was the turning point of India's educational transformation. And it was that experience when I went into the ministry, first as an OSD for the 12th plan, where we wrote the working group reports which feeds into the 12th plan, that the actual comprehensive view beyond your own, task of trying to teach students went into an exercise where you looked laterally at various issues and so on. And it was that triggered, someone read that I handled the national mission on teachers and teaching. One of the greatest defects that we saw was the fact that we were seeing a huge gap in the ability of the teachers to be able to transact clearly. that's how that scheme came about. And then later, I must mention that it was during the UPA 2 that they were thinking of constituting an education commission to look at creating a new policy. But finally, it was this exercise when we had the present dispensation taking over in 2014. And let me also be very clear, we in the ministries study all the manifestos of political parties. And so in the manifesto of BJP at that time, it was very clearly mentioned that they will bring out a new national education policy. So it was an articulation of that that triggered from 2014 June onwards this exercise of it. But truly, like you rightly said, it was not a very easy task for me to move from my position as being a pure teacher to being someone like an educational administrator and a policy maker. It took me at a very anecdotal level. You walk into a class, you see a lot of young faces like you see here. And the vibrancy of that is so different than being in a air-conditioned chamber, which has all the comforts with a personal secretary and a peon and all that being there. But to be there from 9 in the morning to 9 in the night and being available 24/7 to the government was a very, very difficult transition. And it was only the thought that I can make a difference from not just being a teacher, but to be able to transform the way we look at education that possibly held me to the chair so that I was able to really transit. And administration, yes, is a different cup of tea altogether. It has its plus and minuses, Professor Raj Singh. But I think that I would always try to say my perception of the bureaucracy changed when I started working with the bureaucrats. So I must say that they are able to think things in a much larger perspective, whereas we as teachers tend to have a much more specialized niche thinking which doesn't take into account many other factors. So I think both these transform, and though I would say that, I got that by God's blessing and opportunity and maybe the right decisions that enabled me to finally be a part in the policy making formulation. So I'm really grateful to all the situations that happen.
Fantastic. I hope that more and more people go through this transition and the gap in understanding from both perspectives is narrowed down. It's only then we can implement the policies more effectively, because there will be willingness to understand what were the perspective when you decided the policy and then how to implement in the right stride. Ma'am, you've seen the entire evolution from maybe 70s, 80s, and you've seen the transition of education. Why do you feel national education policy was needed?
Okay. So NEP's rationale actually, it's not really a political decision alone, though it is definitely, because as I said, when we read through the manifestos, each political party would like to see a transition kind of a thing. So leave at all the politics of it completely and look at it from the rationale why we thought that the 1986 policy, when it came about. So you had in the 20th century two policies, the 68 and the 86 one. Now, the scenarios in which those policies came out were quite different from the scenarios that we started seeing in the 21st century. So it was basically that any policy, not just education, Professor Raj Singh, is a response to certain changes that happens within the society and the economy. And for education policy to come out in the 21st century is because of the way in which we perceive knowledge in a more comprehensive manner, and therefore the idea that knowledge disciplines are not insular by nature. The insularity of a given discipline, which is silo-based, got changed to a more integrated view of knowledge and interconnectedness of knowledge. The second is, of course, the way we look at learning. Learning is no longer seen as only the cognitive part of it. It is more of embracing skills. It's more of looking at the environment and sustainable development, peace, global citizenship, and finally the importance that we move from structured systems to flexible pathways. And the last rationale was the fact of the disruptive technologies. So when you look at education policy, the three major stakeholders, students, teachers, and educational institutions, be they schools or colleges, have to have a kind of, let us say, resilience that they may be able to become future relevant and become globally ready. So these three, the learning in the 20th century and the learning in the 21st century being different, forced us to really think of a new national education policy, not that there is anything wrong with the 68 policy or that anything was wrong with the 86 policy. I don't like to make a statement which says that 2020 is better than 86 or 86 is better than 68. That's a very wrong notion of looking at policy.
Thank you. I think that gives the right perspective. Ma'am, you know, the whole process started in 2015 with when the drafting started for NAP, and finally 2020 it was announced. We believe that it's not that on 29 July 2020 the policy happened.
Yes.
It was happening for previous many years.
Yes.
This was the last and concluding document which perhaps include every other initiatives taken before this, starting from 2014-15. And the thought process started mostly after the Washington Accord we became signatory to in 2014. I had the fortune of associating with NEP discussions all those 5 years of the drafting period, and of course last 5 years we have been into it as university, as implementers, as maybe talking in the conferences, seminars and webinars, listening to UGC perspective, listening to all other regulatory bodies and other stakeholders, including the global partners we're looking at. Generally, it is found as one of the most widely discussed policy.
Right.
And we have seen that it is normally praised for its futuristic approach. What do you think, having been on both the sides, is the policy appreciated genuinely or there's some drawbacks also? For example, I've heard only one criticism of this, that the entry of foreign institutions with almost no restrictions, with all kind of autonomy given to them, there's a fear of certain narratives being developed and promoted which may not be in the interest of the nation. How do you look at national education policy in that context?
Okay. So if, with your permission, if I may just mention that this is a very people-centric policy, if I may say. And why do I say that is because normally the notion of a policy is where you think that policy is made by a set of 10 people there at the top who don't interact with the grassroots level and then bring out a document which is disconnected from what people would like to have. Whereas in this particular policy, like you rightly said, right from 2014, we started with identifying themes, and 33 themes were identified, and mind you, whatever I'm saying is available in public domain for you to access. 20 themes in higher education and 13 themes in school education. We used a technology platform through the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, MyGov platform. We invited citizens to participate in that. So we called it a bottoms-up approach with a citizen-centric consultative process. And it followed three-pronged strategy of looking at it online, looking at it at the grassroots level, where we had 7.5 lakh user IDs created by the National Informatics Center, where every village, every block, every urban local body, every district had a user ID on which they could respond to questions that were put on the 33 backgrounders that we circulated. And other than this, we had thematic consultations, and we had, you know, the consultations which were driven by the ministry. And finally, you had you had 3 documents that finally we accepted the Kasturirangan Committee's report, to which I was playing a role as the secretary, But we had a TSR Subramaniam Committee report, which is there on NEPA's website, because NEPA as an institution serviced that. We in the ministry, 3 of us sat together to write a document which is called Some Inputs to the Draft National Education Policy. Both these documents were tabled on the floor of the parliament, not accepted by the honorable members of the parliament, which led the then union minister to say that he will form a 3rd committee, and that is this committee, which finally was able to submit a report in 2019, which got accepted. Now on the specific point, and I may say that the criticism is not just restricted to that point, there are a number of other areas in which there has been a lot of angst among the institutions. But this particular one on foreign universities, when we wrote it, it is because primarily we believe a nation which is trying to become a global superpower cannot ignore the fact that globalization is a reality, and that you need to have not just credit mobility and student mobility and faculty mobility, and you need to have institutional mobility also. And if you look at the policy agreeing to the fact that competitiveness is not a bad word. Competition and competitiveness, if played by the rules of the game, is always a healthy thing, because it raises the bar for excellence. And so it is in that spirit, and mind you, it was not the first effort. During the previous government, there was a legislation to come about for the foreign education providers. It went into a parliamentary committee, but the legislation could not come through. But that being said, we in the committee decided that we should have internationalization of higher education, and as you rightly said, that if we have to make a mark, we must be able to allow foreign universities to set up campuses here. 2 changes. We had very clearly mentioned in the document that it has to be a legislative route. It didn't come through a legislative route. So that gives a cause of concern. The second thing we said was the top 100 universities, not the top 500. So 2 dilutions that took place in a scenario where, if you heard the previous speakers in the plenary that we attended, where you are really getting a beating on what India's higher education is. In that scenario, when you bring in the competition, there is a fear that faculty will get attracted there. There is a fear that inclusion, equity, diversity will not be there. And there is also a fear that you may have fly-by-night operators who may come in to merely think of having a profit motive and commercializing education. So the concerns are very much valid. I think it's about how we implement it with a very judicious way and ensure that, on one hand, if you have 7.5 million students going outside, can we continue to retain some of them when only about 45,000 come in from other nations to us? Can we increase the brand value of Indian universities by having other universities which come there, and let Indian universities also compete with them to be able to offer good branding of their own education? So I think it is a difficult, it's a bittersweet kind of a situation, but I'm sure that in the long run, only the best will stay, and it will give us an opportunity to retain some middle class families who may not want their children to go outside. And when you're seeing the world also having a very nationalistic approach, you've just heard Trump talking, and you're seeing students who went to Canada, Kerala is seeing that, are not really enjoying a very good experience. Can they not have a good education being in India if you have some of these foreign universities, or some of our Indian universities coming out with joint degrees and dual degrees? So while the concerns are there, I would still bat for the idea for having international universities setting up campuses here, within the frameworks that we allow. It cannot be unbridled. And we should also allow our universities to set up their campuses there. So it's a win-win situation for both.
And the competitiveness is the key
Yes.
idea when
Yes.
this clause must have been put
Yes.
there. Do you think, ma'am, that NEP 2020 document has certain remedies, certain counters inbuilt into it? For example, Indian knowledge system has been emphasized a lot.
Right.
Instructions in Indian languages has been talked about. Will that counter this concern to large extent?
Yes, I think, see, two things that have, civilizationally, India is a very strong nation. And when we talk about, and when we wrote about Indian knowledge systems, in hindsight, I think we should not have used the word systems. We should have said Indian knowledge, which would have been more inclusive by nature. Because there is a misinterpretation that is happening in terms of having a kind of a theological bent, which has certain repercussions. But when we talk about Indian knowledges, it comes from not only the Indian languages that we are talking about, Indian art forms. You had the previous speaker saying in your panel where you were there that he was watching Kathakali and Mohiniyattam and Odia dance and so on. So it's Indian art forms, music, dance, painting, folklores, architecture, shipbuilding for that matter, started here. Metallurgy started here. You have sports like yoga and others that are typical to India. So Indian knowledges, our young generation of students are somehow not aware of the strength that we have in all these fields. And that is where we wanted that it should be integral to it. And Indian languages, when we talked about multilingualism, I don't know how many of us sitting over here know that we have an 8th schedule of the Constitution which talks of 22 languages. We have as many as 240 languages spoken in this country. And we have as many as 1,680 dialects that is there in this nation. No other nation in this world has this kind of linguistic pluralism that we are having. When that is the situation, the British having come here and our emphasis, or rather an overemphasis on only English language. I have nothing against English. I'm proud of the fact that I had English medium education and it's good to know and speak and communicate well in English, but you cannot do that at the cost of undermining other languages. And you cannot also do that because, if I may say, we started equating ability to communicate in English fluently with intelligence. The most dangerous thing to happen. You can be asking me if we both can speak a common language in maybe Hindi or Malayalam or any language, and I can articulate that, then my intelligence must be recognized. So here is a nation which has so many languages and where we are believing that only articulating in English is a trait of intelligence which cannot be sort of accepted. And when in early learning, the child's cognitive ability is best developed when they learn in their mother tongue, because it is the language which connects you. But as you grow higher, you can learn multiple languages. Now both these, Indian languages and Indian knowledges, have somehow not been understood in the spirit with which it is, and the balancing and the harmonizing, not looking at Indian languages or Indian knowledges as something which is of the past. What our earlier speaker said, values. Values come from language and culture. And if you want a knowledgeable society, it is not just scientific developments. It is creating humanistic beings. And that is where Indian knowledges and Indian languages come in as very important.
Very rightly said, ma'am. It's not only ability to converse in a particular language, which is common, but there's a lot more to learn from each language.
Yes.
Culture, traditions, there's a very rich literature, which is not available if I know only one particular language. In fact, we have a center in the university which is for IKS, recognized by Government of India. And they've undertaken some research where they want to cover up the history in the gap in the history of science for about 200 years plus.
Right.
And they're doing research and finding very, very rare and kind of literature which is on leaves, on stones,
Yes.
written in a particular. So they all learn Sanskrit first. So they come from whether scientists, medical doctors, computer engineers. They learn Sanskrit for a couple of years. They decipher those scripts
Yes.
and then digitize it and conserve it for the benefit of the community of science. Ma'am, coming back, the topic of today's session is Sadya to buffet. In fact, it was last July only when we served this wholesome meal when we came here for the first time. And remember, we couldn't eat everything because it was so elaborate, and that reminded us of the education system which we had, where we have come from an age of compulsory electives. These are two contradictory words. So you have electives, but you can't choose the electives. It's given to, it's prescribed to you, prescriptive kind of electives.
Yes.
We come from that age to today, where almost any combination is possible. You can choose minor specializations, you can choose open electives, you can pursue another degree alongside. You may come from a background which is not related to degree you're pursuing now, that requirement has been removed. You may not come from formal education system, you come from experience stream, recognition of prior learning. And it all sounds very exciting. I had heard about mobility or transfer of credits within the university systems, for example, University of California system, Purdue system. But having this transfer across the universe, so to say, across all the modes of education, is fascinating, but very, very complex. As a nation, as an education, are we prepared for this complexity to be handled? And that I also find that this is one of the most important reasons why there is reluctance in implementing NEP in its true sense.
Right. So,
Or maybe technology can have answers to this.
so no, I wouldn't say the last point. I would react very fast because I always say that technology, if we do not understand its proper deployment, it's likely to create a lot of havoc. And I think while it is inevitable that technology comes, technology is not the only way to solve many of these things which are very ground level actions to be taken by institutions. So rightly, like the title of this conversation, from Sadya to buffet, the imperativeness of flexibility, if I may say. It is no longer an option to give options to students. It is essential and mandatory and imperative that we do that, because we want a more interconnected view of many things that are happening. So like you rightly said, the NEP put forward this idea of a multidisciplinary undergraduate program which talks about common courses, core courses, that is your core disciplinary courses, your multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, language ability courses, skill enhancement courses, value-added courses, and so on. So it's a range of courses. But even in that, why the implementation is difficult is that it is an odd situation. I think a few of us here have all been born in the 20th century, and we had our education in the 20th century. We started our careers in the 20th century, which had a very structured view of things. And here is a generation which does not like, or rather they had been forced to think, or they have lost their ability to think, to become independent, to take independent decisions. I think it was in this session or the other session that they said the power of questioning.
No.
We have, as a nation, systematically and very, very determined manner killed two things: the power of curiosity and the joy of learning. These two, right from our schooling, we have sort of drilled it in that thou shalt not question. Thou shalt only hear and accept it. And therefore you lost your ability for curiosity. And the second is, learning is basically a joyful experience. Learning is something we have as natural Homo sapiens, which has the gray matter, to enjoy. But why did we kill that? It's because I don't like mathematics or I don't like drawing, and I'm being forced to do it because it is a part of that syllabi. That is where we wanted to bring that change. And mind you, we are speaking in a context where all of us are not of a certain level of intellectual achievements. Our abilities are different. Our levels of competencies are different. Can we say tomorrow that I will only teach students who in their class 12 scored 80%? Below that, they are not entitled to learn. Let them perish. Can we take a stand like that? We cannot. Because as a nation and as a society, everyone has to be given an opportunity to develop. So the need for flexibility comes that I may be good at music, I should be allowed to pursue that. And it doesn't mean because I know music, I cannot learn mathematics. Professor Ambat Vijay Kumar is here, and his close friend Manjul Barkar, who was there on our committee, has actually told us that when he faces a mathematical problem, he glows to his music. And that is when the creative side opens up the cognitive side of the brain to find a solution. We have forgotten to realize the creative and the cognitive coexist, and that we should allow children to flourish in both these aspects. So I think the multidisciplinarity, the flexibility, the ability that we should teach children learning how to learn what they said, and teachers not thinking that because we are sitting 3 feet high on this platform that we know it all, because it is an age of lifelong learning, and that we learn from children. We also learn from children. We are co-learners. This entire paradigm shifts, Professor Raj Singh, is an attitudinal shift. So the difficulties in implementing NEP is a juxtaposed 20th century faculty dealing with the changes of the 21st century and attitudinally not able to give up structured ways in which we were used to. And that is why a firing of UGC regulations cannot bring about attitudinal changes. It is a question of being able to think from the other side and to be able to understand it is not even 20 minutes what our earlier speaker Sri Kumar mentioned, attention span. It's that 3-minute TikTok video. They won't look at a video you pass on if it is 5 minutes. So that is where we should be relevant to our students, but equip them with all the multiple competencies and skill sets, including technology. See, we and I are not used to what we just experienced there, whereas the children sitting there are so technologically adept that we should be able to harness that so that they use AI, they use robotics, they use machine learning in the most effective manner. So I think it's this attitudinal shift takes time. I remain an optimist, and I'm sure in a matter of time, we will not find much difficulty in adapting to these new scenarios. We are quite resilient in doing that also.
I think your answer gave a new, at least perspective to me personally, of inclusivity. Why should a student below 80%, below 70%, or even below 90% be left out? Or why, therefore, a student who comes from a different background from school should be left out, should not be given those opportunities, just because it's not available there? And that's what the then AICT chairman said. There are many students who could not study science stream in the school because it was not available in their region or the area. Can't universities design some bridge courses and prepare them to pursue those careers? They may turn out to be better than those who came from science stream. Fascinating. By the way, audience will have a couple of questions. Please be ready with that so that, we make it more interactive or more inclusive. That's the learning I have. Ma'am, another significant aspect of NEP, or not only NEP, general policy framework which we are going through right now, is that how can research be extended to innovation and problem solving? This is one of the specific sentences mentioned in NEP policy document. And it's so valid also because unless education and research helps us solve problems of real life, it's meaningless. I got another perspective from a great scientist of this country who said, what does research do? It converts data and information into knowledge. And in the process, consumes money, keeps consuming, and there's no end to this consumption of money and resources. You always fall short of resources. He says, if we can convert this knowledge back into money through innovation and problem solving, we'll not have dearth of resources. The cycle has to be completed. What could be done in our teaching learning methods at the operational level that it gets institutionalized? That not only teachers, but even students get involved into innovation and problem solving or practice, as you call it, and therefore entrepreneurship, which is the demand.
So I have been trying in the recent times to say that the three missions of higher education, of teaching, research, which we know, and the third mission, that is the social engagement or the community connect. So the point that Honorable Vice Chancellor is telling, that research should have not just a intangible esoteric value, but it should make a difference in the lives of people around you. And these can come out as great innovations, or it can come out as frugal innovations. A simple thing over here, if you see in Kochi city at least that I know, the point that the earlier speaker Shri Kumarji was mentioning, that there is litter of plastic bottles and your lace covers and all that. A simple thing that they did is they have kept a plastic bottle shaped one at many corners for us to dispose it off, isn't it? Now that's a frugal innovation that must have come out of, I don't know if anyone knows who brought that idea, by the Kochi Municipal Corporation. It is about urban waste management and plastic, because our cows who are grazing are eating and chewing that plastic. So this kind of approach that we tell our students. So in practical terms, the 4-year undergraduate program talks about actually experiential learning and giving students this kind of problems for internship. You see, internship was seen only for management, engineering, and of course medicine and many other things, but not for students who were learning what we called as general education, the non-professional degrees. So when we put in internship, history student has to do internship, a sociology student does internship, a literature student has to do internship. They are not going, 44 million students that we have cannot get into industry to do internship. They need to study these problems that are affecting the society and the community, and not every internship comes in through industry-academia collaboration. It comes in by interacting with civil society, it comes in with interacting with libraries, museums, cultural forms, many other institutions. And these children obviously will start looking at things in terms of finding out innovative solutions. Simple things, language for that matter, when, as we say, for example, for the deaf and the dumb, how many of our classrooms are really inclusive, where if a teacher is teaching and that if there is a blind student, fine, because that student is able to hear, but a deaf and dumb student can also be a part of your class. And if the person is totally deaf, You don't have something coming in sign language. Here is AI there, which can, if you have a Google Assistant, it types as you talk. You can have that. If it cannot be type as you talk, it can also do in many other ways by which that child can learn. Do we use AI in that manner? Is there any innovation that is happening? Let's start asking questions. What is it that we need to do? So innovation is not restricted to STEM alone. It is not just science, technology, engineering, and mathematics that research and innovation happens. It happens across. Now, Indians by nature are very enterprising. We are known for that. And it's not coming out from the nation. In all the G20 conversations, in all the global North and South dialogues, Indians are recognized world over as risk-taking and enterprising by nature. And we do not nurture that in our young students. The ability to take risk, to go in for a startup, and therefore what we conventionally use the cliche term to become job creators, looks for entrepreneurial education. And entrepreneurial education is not restricted to professional courses alone. Entrepreneurial comes into all the streams of liberal arts education. And even the notion of liberal arts education is understood as only being arts and humanities, which is wrong. Liberal arts embraces within itself science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The idea of liberal arts that we wrote, we didn't write it in the document, the policy, it is there in the report, because liberal arts is wrongly misinterpreted. And that, again, is the point that if you want innovation, Professor Raj Singh, you must allow children not only to think out of the box, but also to be able to be critical of things. Critical thinking, along with cognitive thinking, and the ability to disagree to a solution that is already available, provokes innovation. Do we do that in our classrooms and in our conversations, in our narratives with our youngsters, and even among the faculty? And I may say that as a faculty myself, with no disrespect, the most resistant to change and the most difficult to adapt are us as educators. We are not able to give up many things. I think that is where the problem lies.
I'm happy it came from a person like you, ma'am.
Yes.
Maybe sometimes we fear saying this to our colleagues.
No.
But that is the essence, in fact.
Yes. I am a teacher.
Without undermining any of the
Yes.
colleagues, in fact. Ma'am, let me come to the last, perhaps, question and the major aspect which you're dealing with. I'm reminded of a saying by Navy SEALs. It says, when the time comes, we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to the level of a training. This takes me to the concept of training, not only because this saying, but also on ground what is happening. We're even struggling to understand the semantics of certain terms. You also brought in your response that multidisciplinarity is one of the major aspects. But can multidisciplinary per se help us achieve the objectives of NEP? I would say no, unless we move from multidisciplinary to inter and transdisciplinarity.
Yes.
That takes us to real life problem solving. You will be surprised to know, ma'am, that we struggle to understand the nuances of these three terms differently. We are still struggling, having gone through the COVID, synchronous, asynchronous, what's the meaning of this? We are trying to understand the difference between assessment, evaluation, and examinations. We use them interchangeably. And that takes me to another aspect, that how training institutions at the national level, state level, whether it's Atal scheme or for that matter NITERS, and many other agencies who conduct training, how are they planning to address this challenge? Apart from that, of course, our own in-house training establishment, training setup, are struggling and finding solutions to this, in fact. But this becomes an impediment in implementation of all these new initiatives.
Yes. So rightly said that the need for capacity building and making people understand many of these core terminologies for them to really look at not only the nuanced differences, but also in terms of actually doing it in a classroom situation. Yeah. What is really happening is that this Malviya Mission Teacher Training Program is one of the national level which The earlier avatar of it was where I was handling it in the ministry. The HRDCs and the MMTCs were merged together, and we have something like 111 centers. You have knitters which are there, which take care of technical teachers training. You have boards which are there, which looks at apprenticeship. So there is a hierarchy of institution, and at the school level you have diets which are there, which takes care of it, block institutes for teachers. There is no dearth of actual institutions which are there for addressing these requirements. But what is happening is the training is done in a manner of tokenism, if I may say so. It is like, if you remember during our student days, we had the NSS and the NCC. It was merely tokenism. The NSS coordinator will say, chalo aaj wahan jayenge aur raste sare saaf kar denge, so we'll become a clean road. It was merely tokenism. Did we really feel that? No. So the same thing is happening. The faculty is coming because it is there for their career advancement, and it is adding to their scores, but not because they would really like to get the benefit of it. And the training also, if I go on talking for 3 hours, using the famed PowerPoint presentation, which I now desist from using because it forces everyone to look at the screen and read only those lines that are there on the screen. But the need for actual hands-on workshop models of teaching. If you want a flip mode, and you say in a 1-hour class that the teacher will talk only for 15 minutes, and children will do group discussion, will come in with role plays, will come in and present things, you need to give that learners that engagement space. Learner engagement and actual learner-directed methods cannot be done through the kind of training that we are currently doing. It falls much below the mark. And even using technology, COVID made us use, like you said, we went into using technology, and we did not really leverage that for a very enriched learning experience. So necessity is no doubt the mother of invention, and we did that, but I think we need to upgrade that and make it more and more, I would say, professional and need-based, and actually empower our teachers. I don't blame the teachers if they can't change, unless they get that kind of very robust training. So I think the training has to be taken to a different dimension. It's not merely an orientation, it's not merely a sensitization, but it's an actual hands-on experience by which they will transform to go beyond the classroom, to think of saying that it is a question of the teacher and the student in an engagement by which there is a lot of transaction, curricular transaction and off-curricular transaction that is happening. So I think teachers are at the moment not really being empowered by the existing mechanisms available to provide for actual hands-on training, and merely oral talks do not really help teachers in bringing about that transformation.
Fantastic. I think that's how, ma'am, presentations have been replaced by this kind of fireside chats, yes, which does not go in a monotonous manner, and everybody can be involved. Yeah, I agree with you. Training has to go to a different level. New dimensions have to be taken. More workshop, more engagement based, and that should ultimately translate to the classroom, what happens there. Friends, I'll take one question from the audience. I can tell you, Madam is an encyclopedia of all the changes taking place and what should be done and how the policy thinking happens in this country. We rarely get such opportunities. There are a lot of cobwebs we have in our own minds, not only about NEP, but various other issues. I think the right opportunity to clear those cobwebs to some extent. I'll take one question from audience.
Can we please pass on the mic?
Please pass on the mic there.
Hi, ma'am. A wonderful conversation. Great to be part of this. My name is George. I run an alternate school. So I've been extensively studying the NEP 2020 for the last 5 years. So I have two questions if you have time. Number one is because I come from the school, run a school, and you were talking about how teachers are trained, and I'm also a trainer, so I very much know how a lot of schools call me for different types of training. And I know the pulse of the teachers sitting there. So do you think that 5 years, it's been 5 years since the policy was announced, and because the teachers are not trained or there is no attitudinal shift that is happening, and with the change that we are seeing globally in terms of technology and all the developments, do you see this policy falling through by the time the teachers are trained to it, and this policy itself becomes outdated in the next 10 years in a country as vast as India? That's one question. And second question is, with the regional languages that need to be in place in the early age of a child, where the policy suggests that, and you're also talking about globalization, you're talking about regionalization, where people from different states coming down, moving around, even at different levels of schooling, kids will move around. Do you see this going to be an extremely difficult challenge where a foreigner from another country coming to Trivandrum and needing to have a lot of communication, teaching happening in Malayalam, he feels like a fish out of water, not able to communicate? So that's another question. How do you see this, taking this forward? Thank you.
So let me take the last question first, that 10 years before, if I don't read and write Malayalam, if I am coming to Malayalam and seeing a bus that is showing only a name of a destination in Malayalam, it is difficult. But today you use a Google Translate and you do that. So technology has come to the use. And if the person from abroad coming to Trivandrum, our children go to Sweden or go to China or go to any other place, they never face that as an issue at all. So I think it is only our way of looking at it, that because we speak multiple languages, when we go outside, not everybody speaks English. Let us understand that. If you go into Paris, you might not see people very fluently speaking English. They may be speaking French. But you handle that because you know that you feel the grass is greener on the other side, whereas coming inward, you feel that the grass is always brown and dry and kind of thing. So I don't think that is really an issue. We are going to see a lot of mobility happening this way. And the learning of Indian languages no way diminishes, as I said, the ability to become a global citizen. So there is no conflict or discord when I talk about localization and I talk about globalization. Globalization, in a certain sense, involves localization also. There is no regionalization. I don't like the words homogenization. I don't like the words regionalization. And when I say I mean to say the policy is not talking about uniformization, homogenization, or anything which is making for, you can talk about standardizing certain things. It does not mean that it can be uniform for all. The other is the time frame. School education is almost into implementing the national education policy. It is not just the training, it is the way in which school education operates, that it is easy for that. There are 44 school boards in this country. The CBSE and the CBSE affiliated schools are all into it. Many of the states, a subject being in the concurrent list, many of the states are doing it in their own way, and we should accept that. Like if, for example, Kerala, since we are sitting here, we talked about foundational, preparatory, middle and secondary. Kerala says that we will follow 3 stages. Fine. I mean, it's okay, as long as the approach to curricula remains the same. So the schools are really into more of that implementation. It's the higher education which is taking off on a slower pace. But that does not mean that the policy will fall through. And let me also give you an evidential and empirical data. Globally, in a study of policies across the world, only 1 in 7 policies get implemented to an extent of about 70%. So if the 2020 policy gets implemented even to an extent of about 70 to 80%, it is much more than the 40% implementation of the previous policies. And I think I should remain an eternal optimist and hoping that it would get done.
Fantastic. I think we also face this problem of foreign students coming in and how to bring in bilinguality in the instructions. So when we gave option, students were not willing to take, let's say, Kannada language in the medium instructions. But what we did, not to leave out those students come from Kannada medium schools or let's say state boards. Fortunately, we have multiple sections of, let's say, engineering. So we carved out one section where we did instructions in Kannada language, Kannada and English mix. And by the time we finished first year, they were reasonably comfortable in English also. And then we merged them in the second year. So the requirement was taken care of. Those students who never felt left out. We also have a large number of foreign students, almost 2,500 students. And they can't be ignored. So they were put in a section where English, and they're taught English before they really join the regular courses. So ways and means, I think one of the most beautiful aspects of this NEP 2020 is that it is not prescriptive. It is left on to us, how do we implement? There's given direction. You have to reach there, you find a way how to reach there. That's the most beautiful part. And that leaves a lot of scope for innovative ways of addressing a particular challenge. So, as you rightly said, ma'am, we are quite optimistic. I personally am a fan of this document. And there have been cases of successful implementation of such policies. If you look at European recommendation 2006, it was discussed for 8 years, more than what we discussed, in fact, 1998 to 2006, before the European Parliament gave an assent to it. And they also reviewed it in between. I think NEP has been very, very prudent in its approach when it says that you take 10 years in implementing and then 10 years operationalizing it. So till 2040 we have time. I have no doubts we'll implement more than 70%. I think given the experience of today, thank you so much, ma'am, for deciphering a lot of things which we had doubts about, cleared a lot of co-BAPs, and the patience with which you took all those questions and the grace with which you answered. Friends, another thing I observed was that here is an example of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinarity. If you want to understand the meaning of these terms, look at ma'am and you'll get the answer. How with complete ease, she was drawing her knowledge from different disciplines, integrating and then answering it. Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to talk to you, ma'am. Thank you so much, and thank you all of you for
Same here, and thank you all. I'll just leave you with the thought of what Alvin Toffler said, of the illiterate of the 21st century is not one who cannot read or write, but one who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So let us hope that we don't become the illiterates of the 21st century. God bless you all, and thank you very much, Professor Raj Singh. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Raj Singh, as well as Dr. Shakila Shamsu. May I humbly request Dr. Shakila Shamsu to kindly accept a token of love and appreciation from our end for having been a significant part of the Summit of Future Kerala 2025. And may I humbly request Dr. J. Leda, the Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor of Jain, deemed to be university, once again to kindly do this honor for us. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for highlighting the urgency with which we need to customize the education such that it will suit the competency of each and every student. And thank you so much once again, Professor Dr. Raj Singh, for having easily navigated through the session, for all the questions that you have brought in. Thank you so much once again. With that, we are concluding the forenoon session. We will be resuming with afternoon sessions exactly at 2, and may I humbly request everyone to kindly be seated by 1:45 because we have got 2 more very highly impactful sessions coming up. Thank you so much and have a great lunch.